All right. Welcome. My name is James Thibodeau. I am doing a curriculum analysis project for my Franciscan University of Steubenville online class, EDU 511 curriculum. The instructor is Dr. Kokiko, and my name is James Thibodeau again. I'm a theology teacher from San Antonio, and I am going to be reviewing a curriculum from the Philadelphia Archdiocese for the K through 8 religion programs. So first off, I chose the religion guidelines that were given to me. They were posted originally formed in 2000, and then most recently updated in 2013. Again, it's from the Archdiocese of Philadelphia, and it's grades K through 8. I have reference page numbers in this presentation, and those were all from the 8th grade curriculum. So my slideshow overview, first off, the foundation elements, the organization elements, content elements, assessment elements, and of course the critique elements. The first four are meant to be objective, just looking at the basics of the curriculum presented and matching them up against criteria I've been given in this curriculum class over the last quarter. And then my final critique elements are going to be subjective. So my opinion, how I think this curriculum is formed, whether it's good or not good, and overall if it fulfills the functions of what is necessary for a religion curriculum. So as we begin with the foundation elements, right? So what builds the curriculum? Where did the curriculum come from? What was the advisory council? What is the founding philosophy or vision? That's what you find in the foundation elements, right? So the advisory group and legitimacy of the document. So first off, the advisory group is not named other than the Archdiocese of Philadelphia. So it can be somewhat assumed that there are teachers and administrators, maybe the superintendent, maybe the bishop has some input, right? In the past, in my own personal experience working for a diocesan school, the bishop and the superintendent, the principal of the school, and then sometimes a couple of the religion teachers that have been there for a while, not tenured technically, but those people are the ones that are going to be involved in developing curriculum. I can only assume that the Archdiocese of Philadelphia has something similar. And then legitimacy, so it was adopted in 2000, this curriculum, and then again, as I said before, most recently updated in 2013. So the credibility of the developers, well, it was published by the Archdiocese of Philadelphia, kind of following along the guidelines of the USCCB. And so that's kind of where the credibility comes from. The specification for learners or of learners, basically I chose the 8th grade one to really hone in on and look at, but I do look at all of the curriculum from K through 8. And so I'll be referencing kind of the different curriculums at points, but for the most part, I'm looking at the 8th grades. So they do need assessments in the 8th grade level and probably at the 7th grade level, but the curriculum actually never specifies any types of assessments, any standardized assessments, or when those assessments would take place. So the stated philosophy for this curriculum. So in this quote, we kind of get the idea, the vision, and the purpose of what they think the curriculum should ultimately do for these students. So hopefully using these guidelines as the basis for teaching the subject of religion will contribute to the developing a strong religious foundation in the Catholic faith for each student and invite the student into the mission of the church, which is the mission of Jesus Christ. So there's no stated educational philosophy, but you can see that it's very subject focused, and they're really honing in on the individual student and trying to match that up with their relationship with Christ and ultimately the church. That seems to be kind of the underpinning philosophy well, I mean, it is the underpinning philosophy because that's what they clearly state, right? So implicit philosophy seems to be an emphasis on the development of the subject, like I just said, and the individual student, instead of just a formation of all 8th graders across the archdiocese. All right. So now getting into the organizational elements. So stated goals, objectives, benchmarks. Well, one of the stated goals found on page 2 is we believe in the Catholic Church and the Church and God's plan. Those are kind of stated objectives, but overall, the problem I find with this curriculum, and I will get into this in my critique, but specifically at this point, is that there's actually no stated objectives or stated goals, and really not any benchmarks. There's content, but there's no, the student should be able to do this by this point. They should be able to know, who the first pope was. There's nothing really like that explicitly stated, just implicitly. So design type. It's definitely the academic subject design. And we can see this from Learning Session 5A, slide 7. This is really apparent because of the chronology and the emphasis on having a prerequisite program. All students need to have taken other classes before taking this class, although theoretically you could drop a student into this class without having any prior knowledge, but it would be kind of difficult, right? This is or what it seems to be, a Foundations of Catholic Faith class for the 8th graders. For the other programs, it kind of varies therein. So the design principles. So the principal sequence is evident because the curriculum is really organized in order which the educational concepts and experiences are to be presented. It falls really in line with the principle of sequence, which is found in Learning Session 5A, slide 4. The curriculum does not fit the principles of scope or continuity directly. And there's no mention of exams. And it's very clear that it's not really sure how deep the teacher is going to take the information. They do say some things that kind of like say, hey, you shouldn't be teaching the catechism word for word, right? But the curriculum doesn't give any specific examples of things that they want to be taught other than the content. And we'll get into that. So the identifiable source of curriculum design. Well, the eternal truths of Jesus Christ and his church, absolutely an identifiable source, right? The divine will of God is proclaimed through the Catholic Church. That's also a divine source. I mean, they're kind of similar, but one's a little bit more specific, right? And then more specific than that, it definitely adheres to the religious guidelines of the archdiocese, because that's what it is, right? But it's also adhering to the Catechism of the Catholic Church. And even more than that, it adheres to the USCCB standards for religious K through 8 education. So how it's organized and sequenced. Well, it's organized in 3 different sections, the curriculum for 8th graders and all of them. It's organized by trimesters, right? So you have 3 trimesters, which typically are 11 to 12 weeks. So the first trimester starts off with a thematic for Unit 1 type of sequencing. And then it switches to chronological. And you can see the thematic on pages 2 through 5. And then when it switches to chronological, it's going to go through chronological for just 1 unit in the first trimester. And then it's going to go back to thematic. And this happens throughout really the entire curriculum. I know that as a teacher, it would be kind of confusing if I wasn't super used to teaching this format. So in that sense, it's kind of awkward when it shifts between the different types of sequencing and organization. And here is just kind of a deeper explanation of that. So it's not clear from the curriculum if the unit's themes are meant to be combined or worked through in the entirety of the semester, the trimester, or if they're meant to be done in that specific sequence. Essentially what I mean by this is when you look at the trimester and you're just reading through it, in a normal curriculum, you would say, here's unit 1, and it's going to take 3 to 5 weeks, right? Or it'll be weeks 3 to 5. Or here's unit 4, and you would know the pacing and you would know when your assessments are done. But in this curriculum, there's no pacing. I don't have any weeks references. And it's not really clear if you're supposed to read the trimesters, outside of the trimesters, if you're supposed to read the units as, okay, let's go through unit 1, then unit 2, or if the units are actually meant to be intermixed because of some specific dates that are given in units. It makes it really confusing. So, for example, on pages 4 and then later on pages 10 and 12, there's specific dates given for the 8th graders, which are like August 11th in unit 1 of trimester 1. And then later, it'll say August 12th in unit 4 of trimester 1. But if I went through the units sequentially, I would have been past August 12th by the time I got to unit 4. Does that make sense? And so it's really kind of weird, and it doesn't make clear sense. Okay, so let's get away from the organization and let's get to content elements. All right, so the content elements appropriate for student needs. Well, they are appropriate for student needs, and it kind of addresses this on page 1. It says, it is our hope that each student will come to a deeper understanding of the Catholic faith and be able to articulate that faith. In response, the entire course revolves around this. It's a course designed to teach the student about the Catholic faith and how to articulate this. And this can be prominently found on pages 2 through 5, and then later pages 32 of 34, again, of the 8th grade curriculum. So student characteristics and teaching background. So the student characteristics on lesson plan or learning session 5B, slide 5. The content is readable for the 8th graders and is determined by the Archdiocese of Philadelphia. The teacher background is unclear. If any teachers were involved in the development of the curriculum, it's not clearly stated. So the domain that's reflected is the cognitive domain. And from learning session 5B, slides 9 through 11, we kind of went over what the cognitive domain is. And basically, it's kind of the basics, right? It's not really clear that this curriculum jumps between any different domains. It really stays in the cognitive domain. And this is clear through pages 2 through 61. It's unclear whether or not the content reflects any other domains, like I just said. So levels of content complexity. So there's clearly 4 levels. So levels 1 through 3, so retrieval, comprehension, and analysis are all things that can be done with the information given. And then level 4, knowledge utilization, is found on 67 through 74, where they basically tell the students, like, okay, you're going to take what you know about prayers and you're going to make a new prayer. And then it kind of gives you a little assignment, but doesn't really tell you how to grade it. So 21st century skills evident. Yeah, there's definitely 21st century skills there. I don't think it explicitly is going to try to focus on any 21st century skills, but in trimesters 1 through 3, the skills of critical thinking, problem solving, and written communication are implied, but not explicitly detailed. And then oral communication is directly detailed in pages 67 through 74, where the students are informed to pray. And this is also evident on pages 1 through 5. So the course is going to cover some substantive knowledge. So central concepts of the Catholic faith, found on pages 3 through 5, organizing principles of the Catholic faith, and then the remainder is just factual data about Catholicism. Who was this guy? This is the first pope. This is Vatican II. These are the foundations of the faith. But the curriculum doesn't go any deeper than that, and sometimes that's frustrating as a teacher. So applications to real life, made evident on page 1, right? This is the quote I just used, but I'm going to read it again, and I'm going to emphasize one little thing. So religious foundation of the Catholic faith for each student. Invite student into the mission of the church, which is the mission of Jesus Christ, right? And as religion teachers, we really strongly emphasize that the religion of the Catholic faith is not meant to be just K through 12. It's supposed to be something that you carry on for the remainder of your life, and they pretty much address that on page 1. Okay, assessment elements, pretty short section. So means of assessment, types of evaluation. Well, there aren't any. There's no assessments. There are no types of evaluations. There's no models given in this curriculum in any of them, K through 8. Orientation, formative, summative, rubrics. Well, just like you'd expect, because there's no examples, there's also no rubrics. There's no formative or summative assessments. Okay, so I know I've been giving a little bit of my analysis as we've been going through, but here's my overall critique elements. So is it coherent? Sort of. I mean, you could feasibly get through this curriculum and look at it for a couple days and then say, okay, I kind of know how I want to teach this as a religion teacher, but I've been teaching for 4 years. And for a new religion teacher, I think that would be actually pretty hard, because you would start off wanting to do it in sequential order, but honestly, it's not very clear how they want it to be broken down by the specific teacher. The implied learning theory, there's no evidence of a real theory being used, but essentialism is probably the basics of what you're going to get, because it's a curriculum that's really bare bones. And I think the idea is they gave the bare bones because they wanted each school and each department, or each religion department of each school, to kind of put the meat on the bones, right? The difficulty is that it ends up looking a lot like standards, and it really doesn't end up behaving that much like a curriculum, other than the fact that it has time restraints. And so you're kind of like, okay, it's kind of a curriculum. They're definitely telling me I have to teach all of this in the first trimester, this in the second trimester, and this in the third trimester. And there's some dates given, but those are just specific to feast days, Lenten observances, Advent, and Christmas. So, other than that, you don't really have specific dates for quizzes or tests or assignments or projects, nothing like that. So the content of the scope and sequence, well, just like I said, the content is clearly basic. The content is meant to be built upon, similar to standards. The scope is present, sort of. The sequence is not very clear. There's no page order. How do you teach the units? Do you teach them together? Are they really units? Because it seems like they're units. But then it's confusing when you throw dates in different units. Okay, overlap and continuity. So basically with religion classes, you're always going to get a high amount of overlap. And that's because when you're talking about the Catholic faith, a lot of times you have to kind of know the foundational elements, build upon them, but then revisit the foundational elements as you're kind of learning the Catholic faith. So for example, as a kid, maybe in first and second grade, you might be learning the Bible stories, like about Moses, right? Well, in 8th grade, I could probably go back and teach about Moses, right? And I would maybe give a little bit more reference to Egypt and what Egypt was doing wrong and why God needed to correct what Egypt was doing, and teach the Israelites the right path, right? That's why he gives the 10 Commandments. And then in high school, I could then go back again and talk about the psychological analysis. I could talk about how God in the plagues was defeating the gods of Egypt. And then in college, I can go even deeper. You see what I mean? So the Catholic faith is meant to be revisited and relived. And as you grow in knowledge and experience in life, you can kind of read into different situations and reread the scriptures. And that's just one element. I mean, there's so many different things about the Catholic faith, the sacraments or prayer. It's a great example. So repetition of content, as again, there's going to be a lot of overlap and repetition found throughout K through 8. So learning activities and experiences, pages 67 through 74 is really the only time we actually get a learning activity or experiences, and it's just prayers, different types of prayers to teach the kids. It's very clear that they need to be taught the Our Father, the Hail Mary. They need to know the Liturgy of the Hours, maybe some saint devotions, and a couple of different prayers for like confession and communion, and know the differences in those prayers. So lastly, my last critiques are really subject isolation is pretty evident here. It really doesn't seem like, especially in the 8th grade class, that there's really any overlap with any other subjects, which I think is kind of a pity because Catholicism really permeates into other things like literature, especially literature. So mostly regurgitation of knowledge and information. No real problem solving is evident. Obviously, as a teacher, you could take this curriculum and you can build upon it, into it, those problem solving ideas, but it's not evident in the curriculum as is. And the standards are laid out by the USCCB and the Archdiocese of Philadelphia. So it's adhering to those standards, and it's sort of building off of them. It's definitely more in depth than the standards of the USCCB. But much further than that, it's kind of a curriculum that's wanting. It's a little bit lacking. If it was given to me by my school, I would have a lot of serious revisions before I would go out and actually teach that curriculum. So my references, obviously the Archdiocese of Philadelphia's Catholic schools, and then a lot of the images I use are directly from Google Slides, their inventory. All right, thank you very much. I hope you really enjoyed this video and you were able to learn something.